Hello students and welcome to today's lesson, A Visit of Charity by Eudora Welty. This is taken from lesson 5, semester 2, and it is the first part of the lesson. It is being presented by Dr. P.V. Geethalakshmi Patnaik, Associate Professor of English, BJR Government Degree College, Narayanguda, Hyderabad. So let us take a look at this picture, students. I have for you a picture, and what does this picture tell us? This is a young girl, probably, and it looks like she has a pot with some flowers, probably, and she's standing in front of a building. And I'm sure you would say that she wants to enter this building. Probably she has this plant, a flowering plant for the people inside the house. Where do you think she must have come, students? Since the title is A Visit of Charity, maybe if it were just a visit, we could have assumed that she has come to meet some friends or probably some relatives. But then because it says a visit of charity, then she must be going, or she must be planning to go to some place, which is a place where she can, demonstrate some kind of charity. Maybe she can come here and help somebody. So this could be the idea, or probably this is what the story is all about. So I want you to just take a few seconds and try to think of the various options that we have for what the story is going to be about. If you come up with any ideas, so let us think about them and see if the actual story has any of these various options that you have thought about, right? So now, I have a few quick questions for you students. And what are they? The first question, like I just asked you, what do you think a visit of charity is going to be about? What do you think the story is going to be about, students? What could be the theme? What could be the plot? And who could be the characters? So maybe I'm sure all of you, maybe you have many options or many alternatives or maybe many ideas about what this story is going to be about. So as I said before, let us see what Eudora Welty has for us. But before that, here is our next set of questions. Do you have elderly people in your home? Do you have grandparents at home, or maybe other elderly relatives at home? Usually, I'm sure grandparents are the elderly people that all of us will have at home. We live with our grandparents or elderly parents, and so obviously the elderly people at home would be our grandparents or aged parents. And what kind of a relationship do you have with them, students? If you have any elderly people at home, what kind of a relationship do you have with them? I'm sure they must be less strict than your parents, right? If your parents are very strict, I'm sure the persons that you would go to would be your grandparents. Whenever there's a quarrel or whenever your parents have scolded you, then you would like to go and seek some kind of comfort or solace with your grandparents, right? This is the usual sort of relationship that all of us have. So do you think your grandparents or your aged people at home are happy with you? Do you try to make life easy for them? Do you like to make them happy? Do you like to keep them happy? So these are some of the questions that I would like to ask you to, think about, right? So let us see the other set of questions that I have for you. Have you ever visited a home for the aged? These are homes where elderly people who no longer have any kind of place in their own homes. Probably their children are not interested in taking care of them, or probably they have nobody left in their family, and so they end up in these homes for the aged. So did you ever get a chance to visit a home for the aged, students? I'm not sure how many of you all must have. visited a home, but then if at all there is anybody among you who has actually visited a home for the aged, I would like to ask you, how did you feel when you interacted with the elderly people there? Uh, did you find it strange to see such people there, or were you okay? Were you comfortable with them? Were these elderly people comfortable talking to you? And more importantly, were they happy? Maybe all of them have not come there voluntarily. Maybe their families have left them there, or maybe their families have abandoned abandoned them, and therefore that's how they ended up in these places in the first place. But how did you feel, and what was your reaction, students? Were you happy to meet them, or were you uncomfortable, or did you feel that it was a kind of an obligation to talk to them, or were you scared or nervous talking to them? Did you try to cheer them up when you went there on your visit? So this time around, these are the questions that I'm leaving you with, right? So think about these questions, and I would like all the other students to also think about these questions. So now I have for you two sets of pictures, students. This is the first set. Let's call it slide A. And I have 5 pictures for you. So I want you to take a few seconds, students, and try and tell me, or try and jot down in your books, what are the common features of these 5 pictures? Just maybe 1 or 2 points, that would be enough. How would you describe these pictures individually? How would you describe them as a group? Is there anything that, is there anything that is common among all 5? Is there anything that is different? So these are some of the points that I would like to, tell you to think about, and try to note down 1 or 2 points. You have 30 seconds to do it, students. So are we done? I'm sure you must have noted down at least 1 point, students. So what would you say is common among all these pictures? Yes, you're right. All of them are pictures of families. At least it looks like families. And why would you say that they are pictures of families? Probably because we have different generations, right? We have these children here, and then we have this generation who's probably their parents, and then the grandparents. So if you see, all these pictures have been chosen very carefully, and all of them have 3 sets of generations, like 3 generations: the children, their parents, and their grandparents. So if you see, all the pictures contain, these different generations, at least 3 generations. The other point that I'm sure you must have noticed, students, is that, of course, the expression, all of them seem to be happy as they're posing for the pictures, right? Then is there anything that is different among them, students? Probably you would say that they belong to different countries, because this picture and this picture obviously are pictures of Indian families, and these are Caucasian families, or rather maybe we can say that they are families probably from Europe or America. And this is a picture of Oriental people with Oriental features, so probably this is China or Japan or Korea or whatever, So these are actually pictures from different countries, or people from different countries. And still, what is common among all of them is that there are, different generations in each picture. So my question would be related to this picture. Like, do you think that these people would be happy in their families? Of course, these pictures show them as happy people, but then probably we can say that these people must be happy, or people, or elderly people would be happy staying with their families, right? So, and now I want you to take a look at the next set of pictures, students. This is slide B, and now take a few seconds and tell me what is common, what is the common feature that binds or connects all these 5 pictures. I also want you to tell me how these pictures, or this set of pictures, is different from the previous set. So these are 2 questions that I would ask you to think about. Right? So probably, I'm sure all of you will come up with the answer that these pictures are pictures of elderly people. This is number one. And they must be, pictures of people in homes for the aged, or in other words, old age homes, right? And and how would you know that, students? By taking a look at these things that they're doing together. So here are, here is this set of people who are playing a game of cards, and here's this set of people who are actually playing a game of chess, and here's this group of women who are sitting around and chatting and probably having a cup of tea. And these two pictures are slightly different, right? They don't show elderly people. In fact, there is only one elderly person here and not in the company of others. And here there is one elderly person with a young person, and obviously she looks like a nurse in her uniform. So maybe we can say that the common feature that connects all these pictures is that they are pictures of elderly people in old age homes. We can say that. Now, my other question is something like, it is supposed to be by inference. Would you say that these people are happy? Maybe to a certain extent, yes, because they are pictures of people with companions of their same age group. They are contemporaries sitting together and chatting and probably having a good time. But I also included these two pictures to show you that, to show you how elderly people also need the company of their family members and friends, and they end up being lonely if they are in old age homes. I'm sure that you must know all these things, students, but I want you to think about them because it is only when we think about these issues that we can understand the story A Visit of Charity in a much better manner, right? So now my actual questions to you are, do you think elderly people would be happy with their families around them? Or do you believe that elderly people would like to lead their lives in old age homes with other people in the same age group and with common interests? So, which one do you think is right, students? Like, how would you describe, when you have seen the pictures were there for a reason. I wanted you to just think about these questions. Like I said, this will enable us to have a better insight into Eudora Welty's short story, A Visit of Charity, right? Now, let us move on to the introduction of the author. Eudora Welty. Eudora Welty was born in 1909 in Jackson, Mississippi, into a close-knit and loving family. She studied at the Mississippi State College for Women in Columbus, the University of Wisconsin, and also at the Columbia University School of Business. So it shows that she had, in fact, a very, very good education. She actually began writing for various newspapers, and she was also very good at photography. However, her real love lay in writing, short stories, novels, etc. So her first publication was a short story titled Death of a Traveling Salesman, and it was published in 1936. Her first book, A Curtain of Green, was published 5 years later in 1941. This was followed by The Wide Net in 1943, Delta Wedding in 1946, The Golden Apples in 1949, The Bride of the Innisfallen and Other Stories 1955, The Ponder Heart 1954, etc. However, there is another book which is very important, and that is The Optimist's Daughter, published in 1972, for which she won the Pulitzer Prize in 1973. This was indeed a highlight in her career. According to Eudora Welty in her essay, Words into Fiction, fiction can be described as, I quote, a personal act of vision, unquote. She suggests that the artist must look at the mysteries of human experiences without trying to resolve them. Eudora Welty's ability to reveal rather than explain mystery is what is most interesting, students. other than the Pulitzer Prize that we have just looked at. Eudora Welty also received the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the French Legion of Honor. And she also served as the subject of a BBC documentary and was chosen as the first living writer to be published in the Library of America series. So all these are the various awards and accolades that she received during her long career. Eudora Welty died on the 23rd of July 2001 in Jackson, Mississippi, which was her lifelong home and where she's buried. Another thing that's very interesting about Eudora Welty is that the house that she lived in is now a museum for visitors. Right. And now let us move on to a very brief summary of the story, A Visit of Charity. A Visit of Charity is one of Eudora Welty's best-loved short stories and was first published in a small literary journal in 1941. It is the story of 14-year-old Marianne and her visit to an old lady's home one winter morning. Marianne is in a youth development organization in the USA called Campfire, and one of her duties, which will earn her extra points, is to visit a home for the elderly. So during this visit, she reluctantly spends time with two elderly ailing women and discovers that they live in cold, uncomfortable rooms and suffer from extreme loneliness. Marianne panics at the sight of their grief and instead of consoling them, flees from the place. The story portrays how the meaning of charity has changed from caring for and trying to help others to trying to earn points or keeping up with appearances. This is very important, students. So I want you to look out for these incidents and for these, maybe dialogues, which will tell us how the meaning of charity has really changed in today's world. The story makes readers contemplate the motives people have for performing acts of charity. This is because even the nurse who is expected to be compassionate is indifferent to the elderly women's suffering. So these are some of the points that you have to keep in mind, students, as we move on to the actual story. But before that, let us take a look at the glossary or the meanings of difficult words in the lesson. Acquaintance. Acquaintance means someone you have met a few times but do not know well. Awry means abnormal or something that is unexpected or unusual. Bleat is the weak cry that a sheep or goat makes. Cameo-pin is a type of decorative ornament or brooch that contains a carving or a painting. Close-cut hair. In the story, it refers to a hairstyle where the hair length is quite short. Clutch means to hold something tightly. Counterpane is a bedspread. Crow, in this context, means to laugh or croak in a proud way. It also means to gloat over someone else's misfortune. Damp is slightly wet. Double rap, here it means to knock on the door twice in quick succession. Enormous means that which is very large in size or quantity. Fogginess in the context of the story means unclear, confused. Imperial means in an arrogant, domineering way. Linoleum is a type of floor covering used to make the floor harder and shinier. Mitten is a type of glove worn in winter and used to keep your hands very warm. Outskirts refers to the outer parts of a city or town. Petunia is a flower with white, purple, or red leaves. Potted means grown in a flower pot. Propel is to push someone or something forwards. Retrieve means to bring or get something back from somewhere. A rigmarole is a long, rambling story. Shrug. This is a gesture in which you raise your shoulders slightly and then drop them. It is used to express doubt, ignorance, or indifference. This is interesting, students. And then the next word is spitefully. It means to act or speak in a manner which is cruel to others. Tongue-tied. It means too shy, embarrassed or scared to speak. Vague means unclear, uncertain. Whimper is to cry weakly or softly. Whitewashed means that which has been painted white using a solution of lime and water. Wicker refers to twigs that are flexible and can be woven together to make furniture or baskets, right? So since you have your textbooks, I would want you to go through these words again, students, because some of them are new, some of them are difficult. So it's better you learn these words because it will help you improve your vocabulary and also help you to understand the lesson better. Now, there is another thing that I thought you should know, students, and this is Campfire for girls, or if you remember, I said that Marianne is a Campfire girl. So what is Campfire for girls? Campfire is a co-ed youth development organization in the United States of America. Its programs emphasize camping and other outdoor activities for youth. So what do you understand by co-ed, students? Of course, it means that boys and girls. The organization was inspired by the Boy Scout movement and was founded in 1910 by Dr. Luther Halsey Gillick and his wife Charlotte Vetter Gillick. The Gillick couple believed that girls deserved the outdoor learning experiences that boys had, and they wanted to help, I quote, guide young people on their journey to self-discovery, unquote. So this is there on the website, students. That is why I had to bring it here. And though it was originally meant for young girls, it became gender inclusive in the 1970s. And the name was changed to the Campfire Boys and Girls. In 2001, the organization became known as Campfire USA. Right? Next. So what does Campfire symbolize? Campfire symbolizes the love of mankind. It stands for warmth of friendship, for friendships, for shared interests, and for common goals. It also stands for the bonds of scouting that make girls one family across the miles, across racial and religious lines, and across economic barriers. So like this point is very important because it says that it also stands for the bonds of scouting that make girls one family across the miles, across racial and religious lines, and across economic barriers. So physical distance, racial and religious distance, and economic distance, they are all brought down. They are all destroyed because of the kind of bonds that scouting, brings up or builds between girls, right? Or among girls. Campfire's purpose is to provide opportunities for children and youth to realize their potential and become caring, self-directed individuals responsible to themselves and others. So Campfire's purpose is very important, students, because it aims to provide opportunities for children and youth to actually realize their potential. And it tries to help them and guide them in becoming caring, self-directed individuals who are responsible to themselves and others, right? And finally, I would like to add that Campfire also aims to improve those conditions in society that affect children, youth, and their families. So Campfire for Girls, or Campfire as it is known now, has very important practices where young students go out and meet people, they try to help others, and they earn their points, they earn their beads, they earn their caps, they earn their uniforms, and this is how they try to enhance their points, or how they try to increase their points. So this is a very important point, and it has a very great connection with the actual story. So now let us move on to the story, A Visit of Charity by Eudora Welty. Right? Like I said before, take a look at the picture and you can see how it shows a young girl holding a potted plant or maybe a flowering plant in a pot, and she is standing in front of a building. So let us see what the story is all about. So be with me, students, and listen to me as I read out the story. It was mid-morning, a very cold, bright day. Holding a potted plant before her, a girl of 14 jumped off the bus in front of the old lady's home on the outskirts of town. She wore a red coat and her straight yellow hair was hanging down loose from the pinpointed white cap all the little girls were wearing that year. She stopped for a moment beside one of the prickly dark shrubs with which the city had beautified the home, and then proceeded slowly toward the building, which was of whitewashed brick and reflected the winter sunlight like a block of ice. As she walked vaguely up the steps, she shifted the small pot from hand to hand. Then she had to set it down and remove her mittens before she could open the heavy door. So this is the first paragraph of the story, students. So what does the first paragraph do? It introduces the protagonist of the story, or the main characters in the story, at the very beginning. And along with that, you're also told about the setting, or where and when the action takes place, right? So let us see how the passage begins. It begins with these words: "It was mid-morning, a very cold, bright day." So mid-morning, it is mid-morning, probably it is around 9:30 or 10, and the day is very cold and bright, says the narrator. And this is because, as we come to know later on, because it is winter, and that's the reason it's a very cold, bright day. Holding a potted plant before her, a girl of 14 jumped off the bus in front of the old lady's home on the outskirts of town. So here we have the protagonist of the story, or the main character of the story, around whom the action revolves, and we don't know her name, but then we are told that she is a girl of 14. And where has she got down, students? She has got down, from the bus in front of the old lady's home, and this old lady's home is situated on the outskirts of town. And now the description of the young girl. We've already been told that she, is 14 years old, and that she's holding a potted plant in her hands. Now there is a description of her, physical appearance. She wore a red coat, and her straight yellow hair was hanging down loose from the pointed white cap all the little girls were wearing that year. So this is a fashion, a contemporary fashion, and so all the little girls were wearing pointed white caps. And this girl too, we still don't know her name, like as I said before. So she has come to this old lady's home, and she's wearing a red coat, and her straight yellow hair is hanging down loose from the pointed white cap. So she stopped for a moment beside one of the prickly dark shrubs with which the city had beautified the home, and then proceeded slowly toward the building, which was of whitewashed brick and reflected the winter sunlight like a block of ice. So this is a very long sentence, students, but I want you to break it up. She stopped for a moment. So where did she stop for a moment? Beside one of the prickly dark shrubs, right? So she stopped for a moment before one of the prickly dark shrubs. And then we have a description about this prickly dark shrubs. So with which the city had beautified the home. She stopped for a moment beside one of the prickly dark shrubs with which the city had beautified the home, and then proceeded slowly toward the building. So she stopped, and then she waited for a few seconds, and then she proceeded slowly toward the building, which was of whitewashed brick and reflected the winter sunlight like a block of ice. So she proceeded slowly toward the building. What does that mean? Here is a young girl who has just jumped off the bus, and she's walking down towards the building. And for some reason, she stopped near the prickly bushes, and then she moved on. And as she proceeded towards the building, it is clear that she's not very happy. She's not very enthusiastic. And how do we know that? Because there is this word, she proceeded slowly toward the building, which is very important. And also the next, in the next sentence, she said, the narrator says, as she walked vaguely up the steps. Why would somebody walk vaguely, right? One would look vaguely, but then one would, maybe it's not it is a word which is loaded with meaning. So the narrator tries to tell us that this young girl of 14 years is not very enthusiastic about entering this building. So she walks vaguely as she climbs the steps. And she's shifted the small pot from hand to hand. So she shifts the pot from hand to hand, probably because she's not very comfortable holding it, or probably she's nervous that she has to face the people in the home. And then she had to set it down and remove her mittens before she could open the heavy door. The door is very heavy and she cannot do it with her mittens on. And what are mittens, students? Yes, you know it, the woolen gloves which people wear when there's, when they are in very cold weather. And so this first paragraph has actually introduced the protagonist, this 14-year-old girl. It has also set up, it has also informed us about the setting of the story. So where is this story situated, students? It is situated in the old lady's home on the outskirts of town. And what does this building look like? The building is made up of whitewashed brick and it reflects the winter sunlight like a block of ice. So I want you to pay attention to this block of ice because later on we get many images or we are given many descriptions in which there is a kind of dampness or wetness in the room, that is old women or the next characters that we come across, those other characters. So where do they stay? They stay in a room where there is a moistness or where there is a kind of dampness. There is this moisture and there is dampness. So these are something that we shall look at in the next part of the story. And next, I'm a campfire girl. I have to pay a visit to some old lady, she told the nurse at the desk. So what does she say, students? She tells the nurse at the desk that she's a campfire girl. I'm a campfire girl, she says. I have to pay a visit to some old lady. So this is interesting, right? I want you to note this point. Right. This was a woman in a white uniform who looked as if she were cold. She had close-cut hair which stood up on the very top of her head, exactly like a sea wave. Marianne, the little girl, did not tell her that this visit would give her a minimum of only 3 points in her score. Acquainted with any of our residents? Asked the nurse. She lifted one eyebrow and spoke like a man. With any old ladies? No, but that is, any of them will do, Marianne stammered. With her free hand, she pushed her hair behind her ears as she did when it was time to study science. The nurse shrugged and rose. You have a nice multiflora cineraria there, she remarked as she walked ahead down the hall of closed doors to pick out an old lady. So once again, this paragraph or these small paragraphs have a lot of meaning, students. They have a lot of symbolism also. So I want you to pay attention as I read the paragraphs again. I'm a campfire girl. I have to pay a visit to some old lady, she told the nurse at the desk. So in the previous slide, as we have seen, the young girl climbs up the stairs and she is not exactly very enthusiastic. There is a word which the narrator uses and the word is vaguely up the steps, right? So once she enters, she introduces herself, but she does not give them her name. In fact, she just says, I'm a campfire girl and I have to pay a visit to some old lady. So we can see how she says some very general things. She doesn't give the nurse her name and she doesn't specifically mention any specific old lady. Instead, she says, I will have to pay a visit to some old lady, which is a very generalized statement. And now the description of the nurse, let us take a look at that. This was a woman in a white uniform who looked as if she were cold. So we have seen how the building is whitewashed and how the building is actually reflecting light like a block of ice. So we have already thought that probably there's going to be some kind of dampness or wetness or moisture or humidity in this building. And the nurse is described, the narrator says that the nurse looks as if she were cold, as if she's feeling very cold. And there's a description of her hair, close cut hair, which stood up on the very top of her head exactly like a sea wave. So Marianne is noticing all these details. So she could actually have told this nurse that she gets a minimum of only 3 points in her score as a campfire girl, but she did not tell her that. And then the question posed by the nurse is, acquainted with any of her residents? Asked the nurse. So she's very abrupt as she asked this question. She lifted one eyebrow and spoke like a man. So her attitude is different, the way she speaks is different, and the way she asks questions and the way she behaves with this young girl are all very important, students. So with any old ladies, no, but that is, any of them will do, Marianne stammered. And why do you think this has happened? She is suddenly nervous. She's not very comfortable and she doesn't know how to answer the nurse. And so she says, with any old ladies, because I don't know. The nurse has asked her whether she actually knows anybody, any resident in this old age home. And Marianne doesn't exactly know anybody. And so she has to say that she doesn't know anybody. But then any of them will do, she says. It's okay. Even if it's a person I really don't know, I don't mind because I have to get my 3 points. This is what she's actually telling herself in her mind. And there's something that the author or the narrator makes a point to notice and to point out. So Marianne gets all flustered, all confused, and so she says that she doesn't know anybody, but then any one of them will be okay because all she wants to do is visit them probably for a few minutes and then come out. So the narrator says that this young girl, with her free hand, she pushed her hair behind her ears, as she did when it was time to study science. So from the context of the story, we can infer that this young girl, Marianne, is very nervous when it is time for her to study science, because probably because the subject is difficult for her. So now she's doing the same gesture that she does when she has to study science. And what is the gesture, students? With her free hand, she pushed her hair behind her ears. So we can safely assume that Marianne is nervous, Marianne is not very happy, and Marianne is waiting for a chance to leave this place. So the nurse shrugged and rose, because this young girl, Marianne, has not given her any name. So she just shrugs and then rises, and she says, "You have a nice multiflora cineraria there," she remarked as she walked ahead down the hall of closed doors to pick out an old lady. So what is the nurse doing now? She's actually walking down the corridor, and she is trying to gauge to decide which old lady to actually wake up from, because they're all sleeping. At least this is what we can understand. So she tries to find some old lady to whom she could take this young girl and probably introduce them. Now moving on, we are going to the next paragraph. And what does this paragraph say? There was loose, bulging linoleum on the floor. Marianne felt as if she were walking on the waves, but the nurse paid no attention to it. There was a smell in the hall like the interior of a clock. Everything was silent until, behind one of the doors, an old lady of some kind cleared her throat like a sheep bleating. This decided the nurse. Stopping in her tracks, she first extended her arm, bent her elbow, and leaned forward from the hips, all to examine the watch strapped to her wrist. Then she gave a loud double rap on the door. So this description of the floor of the corridor is very important, students, because it is done deliberately, because the author or the narrator is actually trying to, let us say the author is trying to build up the setting and the environment of the story. And so what is the description of the linoleum? So what do you understand by linoleum, students? We have already seen in the meanings. Linoleum is actually a kind of floor covering which is used to make the floor harder and shinier. So here it could be wooden flooring, and so in the corridor you find, Marianne finds that there is loose bulging linoleum on the floor. So the linoleum is all bulging and it needs some kind of repair. So Marianne felt as if she were walking on the waves, but the nurse paid no attention to it. So why do you think the nurse paid no attention? Probably the nurse is used to walking on it every day. Probably it's been a long time since actually any repairs were made in that old age home. So nobody is actually seemed to be bothered about trying to get these boards repaired. So what could be the reason, students, for all this? The reason could be that nobody, or probably we can say society in general, is not very interested or very concerned about elderly people. So this is something that Eudora Welty is trying to tell us. She doesn't tell us anything directly. All this is indirect, and we have to infer from the given situation and from the given words on the page. So there was loose, bulging linoleum on the floor. Marianne felt as if she were walking on the waves, but the nurse paid no attention to it. So mark this sentence, students. This is very important, as I said. There was a smell in the hall like the interior of a clock. So there is a very strange smell, a very unusual smell in the hall. So probably the residents in the old age home would not have minded it, but Marianne has come there for the first time. So it is very obvious that there is a very strange smell in the hall, which is like the interior of a clock, she says. Everything was silent. And as this nurse and the young girl walked down the corridor, suddenly from behind one of the doors, an old lady of some kind cleared her throat like a sheep bleating. There is this very odd sound that one of the old ladies does, and it is something like she's clearing her throat. But the narrator compares this clearing of throat to sheep bleating. There's that very unusual kind of description that we find here. So once the nurse hears this, she makes up her mind. So when this phrase is used or this sentence is used, this decided the nurse, it means that the nurse has made up her mind here due to this earlier incident or earlier occurrence, which is, the coughing or clearing of throat of one of the old ladies from behind the door. This is because most old people or elderly people are still sleeping, even though it's mid-morning. And the nurse also does not want to wake up or disturb anybody who is still sleeping. So since she hears this cough or the clearing of throat from a particular room, she stops in her tracks, and then she extends her arm, bends her elbow, and leans forward from the hips in order to examine the watch that is strapped to her wrist. So she's trying to see the time, and she's trying to decide whether she can take this young girl into that particular room. And then she gave a loud double rap on the door. So this is knocking twice in quick succession. So what does the nurse do? She walks down the corridor along with Marianne, and she tries to decide which room to enter and which old lady to introduce to this young campfire girl. But then how does she do it? So as she's walking down, she hears some kind of a sound, some kind of a noise from one of the doors, from behind one of the doors. And so she decides that since these old women, or probably one woman, is anyway awake, it is better to take this young child to that room. And so she gave a loud double rap on the door. So with this, we come to the end of today's lesson, students. But before we wind up the class, I want to discuss these points that you are supposed to remember. The first point is, Eudora Welty was an American short story writer, a prolific writer, or somebody who writes numerous or a huge number of books or works. She was a prolific writer, and she wrote numerous stories in multiple genres. It's not just as though she has written stories in one particular genre. In fact, she's written stories in various genres. And her stories often portray relationships between individuals and their communities. This is very important, students, right? Even in this story, we will be asked to think about the kind of relationship that individuals need to have with their communities, how involved people are in their communities. This is a very important point that her stories often make. A Visit of Charity is one of her most important stories and was first published in a small literary journal in 1941. It is the story of 14-year-old Marianne and her visit to an old lady's home. Marianne is a campfire girl, and you already know what campfire is, students. And Marianne has arrived at the home to visit any old woman and present her with a potted plant. And why does she want to do this, students? We have already seen, but then let us do a recap. Marianne's motive is not altruistic or selfless, as she does this in order to win a few points as a campfire volunteer. So if you remember, she said that she will be getting a minimum of 3 points only, right? From her visit to the old age home. Marianne enters the home, approaches the nurse at the reception, introduces herself, and states her purpose. And see, this is what she does in a few words. And then the nurse takes her down the corridor, and hearing a noise from behind a door, stops in front of it and raps on it. So this is where we end today's class, students. In the next class, let us see what is there behind this door. So who does Marianne get to meet, and what happens in this encounter? What kind of lessons does she learn, or is there something dramatic or drastic which takes place? Let us see. So I hope you enjoyed the lesson today, students. I want you to, go through those glossary of words, the difficult words from your textbook, and try to remember as many of them as possible. Okay, thank you, students, and goodbye.